We are honored to be joined in studio right now by the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Tom Horne joins us. Thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate you being here.
I want to really thank you for having me. The idea of having calm discussions about disagreements is what we need more of in our society. So many TV and radio stations are just cheering sections for one side or the other, and I think it's very much to your credit that you've let me to come on.
Well, sure. Now, to that point, this all began because almost 2 weeks ago we did a segment about some of the different culturally relevant courses that were being taught in Arizona schools. And part of the article that we were keying off of came from the Arizona Republic, where they made mention of you. How race is taught in schools is still the subject of a heated debate, both in Arizona and nationwide. Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Horne vowed to eliminate critical race theory from schools while running for his current term, which ends in 2027. He claimed the concept, which examines the way racism shaped American institutions and society, was being taught in K-12 schools, and that it divides students into oppressors and oppressed based on their race. It goes on to say that Katie Hobbs vetoed a bill that would have restricted the way schools teach about race. The third year in a row that legislation was introduced targeting critical race theory. So your contention is, yes, it is being taught in schools across Arizona.
Yes, and in fact, my communications person, I think, sent you a list of 200 teachers that signed from 20 different school districts, including our largest ones, that signed a statement put out by the National Teachers Union that said that if the state had laws restricting the teaching of critical race theory, they would violate those laws. So, these are role models for our kids. If they say they're going to violate a law, then this must be very important to them. And then it's an indication that they are teaching critical race theory.
Is that, and I apologize because I'm going to try to apply some critical thinking here, Are we jumping to conclusions? In other words, they signed a bill and you're making the assumption of the negative. And it's very difficult to prove a negative, right? We know that. So the fact that they signed a bill saying that they're not going to adhere to any laws, is that as much a political statement as much as it is, to your point, evidence that they are, in fact, teaching this critical race theory?
Yeah, I don't think they would have signed that unless they, in fact, were teaching critical race theory. And then I can give you examples. In fact, you may remember, I don't know how long you've been around, but in 2009, during my second term as superintendent of schools, I destroyed the teaching of critical race theory in the Tucson Unified School District. I got the legislature to pass a bill. I put a stop to it. Then when I left office to go back to the practice of law, it came back. So it's
Why did it come back?
Because I wasn't there to keep fighting against it. It really is being taught. There's no question in my mind about that. And I've where I can, I've been fighting against it.
Can you point to schools specifically where it is being taught? We saw the list of the 200 teachers.
Right.
To me, it feels like if it was being taught in these schools, why aren't we in Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale hearing more from parents, superintendents, students, and other teachers who have an issue with it being taught?
Well, parents definitely have an issue. During COVID,
if it was being taught, I can understand that parents would have an issue with it. But
Right.
but now it feels like a boogeyman to me.
well, they saw
Superintendent.
on their kids' computers, because during COVID they were taught from a distance. They saw it being taught, and they went to school board meetings and protested, and they weren't always treated politely. So that was the reason that I established the hotline where people could report things to me. So, for example, we had actually a teacher report from Mesa where they sent a picture of a visual that was used in teaching the teachers in professional development that said the United States was a white supremacist country. We publicized it, and then they stopped giving that professional development. But we have gotten those reports, and where we've gotten them, we fought against it. And in fact, on the school report cards that are on our website, there are two websites. There's the state board website, and there's our Department of Education website that gives grades to the schools. The The one with the state board is basically just gives a grade. Ours gives a lot more information. And one of the things I did was ask the people, do you teach critical race theory? Do you have excessive social emotional learning? Do you have inappropriate sexual instruction? Are you helping the teachers when they have discipline problems? And I put that on the website. Now, DICERT refused to respond, which indicates that they are teaching critical race theory.
Again, assuming the negative.
It's not an assumption. It's drawing a reasonable
So if they don't
conclusion.
respond, you simply assume that they are teaching it?
Yes, because they know it's not good publicity for them to not respond.
And it couldn't simply be that, again, that they don't want to fall in line with what you're asking them to do.
Well, everybody else responded. So I draw the conclusion that they are teaching it, and they don't want to answer the question because they don't want to be caught.
Do we have
telling
parents
the
from
truth.
DICERT that have filed complaints?
I'm sorry?
Are there parents from DICERT that have filed complaints or called the hotline that you're talking about?
I haven't gotten any complaints on DICERT. I did, as
So
I mentioned, on
is
Mesa.
there evidence, affirmative evidence, that DICERT is teaching anything under critical race theory?
I think it's a reasonable conclusion from the fact that they wouldn't answer
Would
my
it
question.
you're a lawyer. Would it stand up in a court of law?
Yeah, sure.
It would?
Yes, the judge instructs the juries that they can draw reasonable inferences from the evidence.
Let's talk about the complaint line just a little bit more.
Yeah.
How many valid complaints have you received on that complaint line as opposed to prank calls and superfluous other voicemails that have been left?
Actually, we got the crank calls,
Yeah.
big time, tens of thousands of them. It was an organized effort because in Virginia that happened and they gave up, but I had a little more tenacity and we stuck with it. We just ignored the crank calls.
So what's the complaint line look like these days? Are people coming out of the woodwork to complain about this?
We get complaints. It's not overwhelming, but we do get complaints and we act on them when we get them.
What kind of action do you take when you get those complaints?
Mainly when we publicize things, the schools stop doing them because the publicity isn't good for them.
So is there there's no discipline then?
Well, Arizona is a local control state, so I can't order the schools not to do it, but I can use other methods. I have something that they sign when we give them grants that says that they're not doing it. I have a number of ways that I can indirectly prevent it or get people to stop it, but I don't have the power to order them not to do it.
Superintendent Tom Horne is our guest today, and we'd like to continue the conversation if that's all right. We have to pause for just a few moments. It's been wonderful having you in here, and I'm glad we can have the civil discourse.
Yes.
So we want to also get into some of the other issues that are facing Arizona schools, including the teacher shortage. Now enters the 9th year, and this issue, as you know, spans both the Republican and Democratic leadership in both the superintendent's office and the governor's office. You're going to hear maybe what the latest plan is to shore up those shortcomings. That is next. Chris and Joe Show, KTAR News on air, online on the KTAR News app. And with us in the studio, it continues to be in the studio with us, is the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Horne. And it is, again, an honor to have you in here. We do appreciate you being in here.
Well, I appreciate you guys doing it.
Of course. Now,
you're good role models for other stations.
Hold on now. Pause just a second.
We're not done yet.
Like Charles Barkley, we are not role models. Let's not fall into that trap. So we had a chance to talk a little bit about the critical race theory and your assertion that it's being taught in schools.
Right.
I would assert that there is no affirmation of that. You say there's no evidence that it's not being taught in schools. I say more than that. I say it's a reasonable inference from the evidence that I mentioned to you.
Well, you mentioned the lack of a response as evidence from DICERT School District.
Yeah, and there's a rule at law that silence can be taken as assent. So if someone is silent where you expect them to speak, you can make reasonable inferences from that.
Yeah, except the Miranda rights thing. I mean, if we're talking about the criminal court, it's a little bit different story, right? So I just want to make sure we're clear because I don't want people thinking.
In civil cases
courts.
too. I've tried a lot of civil cases,
Sure.
and the jury's instructed they can draw reasonable inferences from someone not speaking when a reasonable person would speak.
So we had a story that ran on KTAR News. It just happens coincidentally. We didn't coordinate this with our digital department. It happened to come out at the same time. and that is that the Arizona teacher shortage now officially 9 years in. So, again, this is something that's happened under Democratic and Republican leadership in both the governor's office and in your office. Mm-hmm. What is the issue? Why are we having trouble getting the number of teachers to the right amount and keeping them there in Arizona?
Yeah. Every year that I'm in office, I go to the legislature. I give a State of Education speech. And last year in March, I told them we have a real crisis as far as teachers. We are losing more teachers than we're gaining. So if we don't take strong action to reverse that, in the long run, we could end up with no teachers. You can imagine how the public would react to that. So I proposed the following things that needed to be done. When teachers leave, we survey them and ask, why are you leaving? The number one reason, obviously, is salary. Mm-hmm. And so I told the legislature they've got to increase the salaries. Matt Gress, a Republican legislator, had a bill that would have given every teacher a $10,000 raise, would have put us in the top 10 for starting salaries nationally. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. That was a tragedy. I fought hard for that. Secondly, a close second to the reason they leave is failure to get support from administrators on matters of discipline. I had a letter from a teacher at Phoenix Union who said that she told a girl to do her work. She shares our philosophy that every instructional minute is precious. And the girl said, F you, but she didn't use the letter. She used the word.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So she called the administration and said, you need to do something. And they said, use your social emotional learning. That doesn't create any disincentives from misbehavior. And, students need boundaries. They want boundaries. But if they see one student getting away with misbehavior, the others imitate it. And pretty soon it's anarchy, and teachers can't teach in that circumstance. And I would leave the profession if I had to teach in a situation where I wasn't supported on discipline. So I pushing a bill that would have given administrators incentives to support teachers on discipline. It didn't pass, but we'll try again next year. I hope it will pass.
That's the second time that you've mentioned social and emotional learning.
Yes.
And how do you define social and emotional learning?
It's a distraction from academics.
But what is it?
Well, it's addressing. It supposedly it's addressing students' emotions, but I've read some of the curricula, and some of them really are carry hidden critical race theory within their curricula. So it becomes a Trojan horse for critical race theory.
How would you say it differs from your 6 pillars of character? Because I've talked to a number of teachers who bring up your 6 pillars of character,
right,
and they say that is very similar to social emotional learning, and that was kind of an original pillar of social emotional learning with trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, citizenship, caring.
Very good.
Caring, and I've got it written in front of me right here.
Okay, I can do it from memory.
Sure, I bet you can. But when you talk about caring, and I think social emotional learning, again, how would you define what that is? Because to me, caring seems like it could be a pillar of character, but also seems like social emotional learning could be an aspect of that.
I'll give you an example. I got another letter from a teacher who said the students, she was a high school English teacher. She said the students hadn't learned anything in the last 10 days. Under social emotional learning, they were sitting around and talking about their identity. And she wondered why people wanted the kids to be ignorant and why they didn't want her to be teaching the academic curriculum. She was very frustrated by it. So it's a distraction from academics. My heroes are biology teachers who love biology, history teachers who love history, and so on. And they want to teach their subjects bell to bell. But they told me after I was elected, before I took office, some of them approached me and said that under the social emotional learning regime of the prior administration, they were forced to play what they described as dumb games with the kids, and they wanted to teach their academics. And my focus is on academic results. I want subjects to be taught bell to bell. I don't want them to be distracted by playing games.
Superintendent Tom Horne is our guest right now. As you mentioned, heroes are history teachers who want to teach history. But you also made mention that in some of the training, teachers being taught that America was a white supremacist country.
Right.
What is the foundation of America then, from a historical perspective, that in some way does not paint it as being one that showed the white race as being the dominant race, that basically took out indigenous peoples, that enslaved people who were black, that chased people from other countries away?
Right.
How do we teach bell to bell accurate history that somehow ignores accurate history?
Well, I've always made it clear that I want to teach history, and I want to teach the horrors of slavery and of Jim Crow and what happened in Oklahoma and so on. I think we should teach those things. I think the really outstanding thing about the United States is the way we've engaged in continuous improvement, and we aren't nearly the kind of country we were when we started or before the Civil War.
I don't disagree with that, but redlining laws were in place as little as 70 years ago.
But not now.
We have people, of course, but is there not a ripple effect? I mean, we have covenants that are still on the books, although unenforceable thanks to the Civil Rights Act, that said to people, minorities and Jews were not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods in Central Phoenix.
Yeah, I'm a Jew, so
I know you are. That's why I wanted to make sure.
Right.
So at some point, are we ignoring the fact that there's a ripple effect by saying, well, that happened a generation ago, so everything should be hunky-dory now?
Well, we've passed laws against those things. Red lines are definitely illegal. If somebody makes a racist comment in public life, their careers are pretty much over. Our society is very different than it was. It's not perfect, but it's a lot different than it was, and I think continuous improvement is one of the themes of American history.
That sounds like social and emotional learning to me, that we've learned that those things are inappropriate, that we have adjusted society thus forth. I mean, that doesn't sound like a Trojan horse to critical race theory. That sounds like progress.
That's not social emotional learning. So what it is a description of what's happened historically. It's not social emotional learning.
I guess I'm confused then, because you made mention social emotional learning is a distraction. You didn't define it for us. You just said it's a distraction and a Trojan horse to critical race theory. The closest we've gotten is the 6 pillars of characteristics, and I have to tell you, I'm completely confused as to what critical race theory is, about what real history can be taught,
right?
And also about where is the evidence. You made mention of complaints that Dysart is teaching critical race. We don't have any complaints from parents or teachers along those lines. You had an example in Mesa that's been dealt with. There's no discipline that's going on.
Well, I don't have the power
confused.
to discipline. I would if I could, but I don't have the power to do that. But if it stops, that's progress. I'll give you another example of social emotional learning. The definition, I described it as a distraction from academics, and I gave you an example of a letter I got from a teacher, and other teachers have complained that they were required to play games when they felt they should have been teaching their subjects. My philosophy is every instructional minute is precious. We have studies that say time on task, the more time you spend learning, the more you learn, which is kind of obvious. A professor did a federally funded study to show that, and his mother said you needed a federally funded study to tell you that. And so my emphasis, instead of emphasizing on having them play games with the kids, is to have them teach their academics bell to bell so we can get our kids in better shape with their English and their math.
We're still dancing around the definition. What are these games that are being played? Because let me tell you.
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Okay.
It used to be that when the teachers come to school before the kids do, and they would sit around and they would look at data that they would get from the Department of Education on how each student did on the test, and talk about what they need to do for each student, and on past teachers, if there were too many students falling short on one standard, how they need to adjust their teaching. A teacher described to me now under the previous regime of social emotional learning, the teachers would sit around and discuss, if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be?
Okay.
So a lot of nonsense is.
And that's critical race theory?
No, that's social emotional learning.
But you said social emotional learning was a Trojan horse of critical race theory.
Oh yes, because I've read their curricula, and they've got some of this racist stuff where they divide people by race and characterize people by race. And my view is everyone's an individual. Race is irrelevant. Gender is irrelevant. Gender orientation is irrelevant. We need to treat people as individuals based on what they know, what they can do, what their character is, and what's their ability to appreciate beauty, and not talk to them about what their race is. Incidentally, in your program that I reacted to, you said I said they were teaching it in grades kindergarten through 2. That was 12. 12. Okay.
Yeah. K-12.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. No, that's true.
So when did the social emotional learning curriculum go into effect? You said it was the last regime, so it was under Hoffman.
Under Hoffman, yeah.
Right.
That was her thing. She pushed emotional.
So she implemented that on her own?
Yes.
She did?
Yeah.
That wasn't something that was passed by the legislature?
No.
Okay. So SB 1376 signed into law by Governor Ducey, which is a school's curriculum of mental health that defines social emotional learning and mandates it being taught in schools. That is not true. That is all fabricated. That is not something that was passed by the legislature and signed by the Republican governor.
That wasn't what I encountered. What I encountered was what I described to you. Teachers complaining to me about being required to play games. Mental health is something teachers have always been concerned about. If a student shows a sign of a mental health problem, they need to deal with it, or they need to send them to the psychologist. And I fund, through the Department of Education, we fund social workers and counselors in the schools. I've been attacked for that, but I think it's important. If a student comes to school upset about something at home, it's hard for them to learn. They need someone to talk to. So that's not totally different from the kind of thing that Kathy Hoffman was pushing.
All right. So as defined by the Arizona Department of Education, as passed into law by the state legislature, as signed by Governor Ducey, social emotional learning is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skill, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. That is specifically from the state law, from the Arizona Department of Education,
right,
and then from the law that was passed by the legislature.
And I have no problem with that, but that's very different from what I encountered, what I was told by teachers was going on under the Kathy Hoffman administration.
Want to come back and talk just a little bit more with you about this Arizona teacher shortage, very serious issue.
Yeah.
And you have...
There was one other thing I was going to mention, and that is I had a bill to, I was promoting a bill to prohibit cell phones in the classes. You can imagine what it's like to teach a class and the kids are scrolling on their cell phones.
Yeah, we gave you a hard time because you agreed with Governor Newsom on that one. I thought, would we ever see the day that Superintendent Horne and Governor Newsom would agree?
I agree. I probably agree with you guys about a lot of things.
I think so.
I think you agree with us on that one. We certainly agree. Cell phones in the classroom are a huge obstacle.
Yes, and so we got a bill passed in the legislature, and the governor vetoed it. And I have described that as an irrational and irresponsible veto, because teachers should not be required to teach classes where kids are scrolling on their cell phones.
Teacher shortage, and then the latest report card came out from Consumer Affairs.
Right. So this report card from Consumer Affairs has Arizona ranking dead last in public education across the United States. With that being said, you have a few years left in office as superintendent.
And I'm running for re-election in 2 years.
There you go.
Maybe more than a few.
Breaking news.
At least a few.
There we are.
How would you grade your performance, knowing that Arizona does rank dead last in public education across the United States?
Well, we're making progress.
Based on what metric?
Well, the gold standard for measuring these things is not this obscure people who study you're talking about, but the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's a test that comes from the federal government, and that's the gold standard. And if you rank the states from 1 to 50 or 51 as they did,
with DC.
Arizona's smack in the middle on the test scores, even though we're second to the last in funding. So I've been advocating my entire adult life. I've been advocating for more funding, but I think the schools are doing pretty well with being almost last in funding to be smack in the middle on the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
When are you going to be able to knock the legislators around and get some more money put in here?
Well, I deal with them a lot. In fact, at one point somebody said they should give me an office because I spent so much time at the legislature.
Very good. Superintendent Tom Horne, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate this very much.
Yeah. We do as well.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe, and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.